Hey, welcome back, everyone. Time to do another compilation video of two of our most popular series. The series about places that need to be bulldozed and started over, and the one about places that are going downhill. Now, we've done a couple of these like 2 or 3 years in a row. I've grabbed some of the better ones, and the way I judge if they're better is how many views did they get and how many people copied that video. That's a trend these days. So, we're going to start things off with a video we did in 2023 about states that were going downhill. Let's take a look.
Are you looking for a new state in 2023? If you are, you're not alone. 2023 is predicted to be one of the most active years for state-to-state relocation on record. Today I'm going to tell you the ones that you should probably avoid. As we come out of the pandemic, a lot of states have started to turn things around. Every state took a hit over the last few years. Some, in my opinion, have set themselves up for success post-COVID. Others, not so much. Some states are dealing with old problems that have gotten worse since the pandemic, while picking up some new ones. These are states that are going to get worse before they get better. This video is my opinion based on information that I've been taking in over the last year. Are all these states 100% horrible? No. Will they struggle in 2023 and beyond? I think so. If you think a state shouldn't be on this list, I would love to hear about it in the comment section below. These are just my opinions and why I have those opinions. Yours are just as valid as mine, I'm sure. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Kentucky. Kentucky has some issues. The first one is lack of confidence in their elected officials. There have been a few voter surveys in recent years that signal that the residents are about done with everyone from the governor to the senators to the congressmen, mayors, and all the way down to the dog catcher. Kentucky is always in the top 10 when it comes to highest poverty rate. In 2021, they were ranked the fourth poorest state behind three other states that are on this list. Compared to most other states, they have more than their fair share of minimum wage jobs, and that helps boost their poverty rate. They use the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. On top of all that good news, the bluegrass state is also one of the worst when it comes to the opioid crisis. Now, all throughout the country, it's gotten better since, I'd say, 5 or 6 years ago, but their progress on that one is a little behind some of the other states that were hardest hit. The things I just listed and a bunch of other reasons are why I think things will get worse before they get better in Kentucky. I will say, the people are great, and it's a beautiful state when it comes to natural beauty. Number 9, Ohio. Ohio's another state where the residents are starting to say they're not digging what's going on with their politicians. I don't want this to get all political or anything like that, so I won't, point any fingers, but I did notice that on a lot of the surveys where they asked people to give their opinion, one politician in Ohio seems to be the most hated politician in the country. Congratulations, Ohio. Ohio's biggest problem is its cities. I mean, their rural areas aren't terrible, and they have some really nice small towns, but they have more than their fair share of rundown cities. Cleveland is not great. Toledo's a nightmare. Youngstown ain't great. Cincinnati's nothing to get excited about. Dayton, Ohio's kind of a nightmare. And even Springfield, Ohio has a crime rate that's 150% above the national average. Now, obviously, any state, you could say, well, their cities, their stats are bringing them down, and that's the problem. I mean, California has San Francisco, Los Angeles, Stockton, Fresno. But California's a huge state. You could fit almost 3 Ohio's in California. Community Solutions ran a survey on Ohio voters and asked them what's the biggest problems this state faces: economics, addiction problems, and inflation. One of the best things going for Ohio is their real estate prices aren't as terrible as other states in the area. They're not rising as fast as other things. Now, that's statewide. Some of the cities you could point out that the real estate prices are jumping pretty good. That's how it is in cities. Overall, the state is doing pretty good when it comes to real estate prices. Number 8, Oregon. Now, the Beaver State has got some problems. Actually, it's got one big problem, and it's called Portland, Oregon. I'm currently in the Portland metro area right now. I live in one of the suburbs. Oregon overall is a pretty good state, and I think if we could get rid of Portland, it would be considered one of the better states. We have amazing landscapes, a great beer scene, no sales tax. We just have Portland, Oregon, which is like one of the homeless capitals of the United States. Now, in recent months, it's been getting a little bit better, and they're cleaning up the streets, but it's still a problem. They've just moved them to other areas. Now, Salem and Eugene aren't the greatest cities in the country either, but they're not nearly as bad as what's going on in Portland. At least Ohio and California have a bunch of cities bringing them down. We just got one, really. I reached out to the mayor's office a couple weeks ago asking if I could ask him just one single question for a video. I even told them the question. It was going to be fun. It wasn't a gotcha question or anything like that. I never got an email back, nothing. Now, do I think Oregon's going to get better next year? No, definitely not. Portland's going to continue to drag it down. I mean, the eastern half of this state has decided they want to move to Idaho. Not themselves. They want to move the whole state, like cut Oregon in half so they could just be part of Idaho. This will never happen. It's delusional to think that it would. Idaho doesn't even want these people. There's a better chance of being chased down the road by actual flying monkeys than there is for Oregon to split in half and Idaho taking taking the eastern half of Oregon. But yeah, in 2023, 2024, maybe even a couple years after that, Portland's going to continue to drag Oregon down. Number 7, California. Now, most of you are probably wondering why California is not further down on the list. I mean, their cost of living is outrageous. Home prices are ridiculous. The homeless situation is completely out of control. Companies are leaving, and for the first time in like the state's history, recorded history, I should say, they're actually losing a little bit of population in the last 2 years. We just talked about this on another video. Now, the only reason they're not further down the line, they still have a great economy, incredible weather, beautiful state. U.S. News has them ranked 5th in the country for healthcare, and I will tell you, they do have some incredible hospitals. Not just 1 or 2, I mean, throughout the state. And they're always in the top 10 when it comes to their economy. I just mentioned this to someone the other day on a comment that California's economy, if you take Texas out of the equation, it would take about 4 or 5 states combined to equal California's economy. Now, here's the thing. They're not going to get better anytime soon. 2023, 24, 25, and I think even further out, California is going to continue to travel down a road nobody wants to be on. Their population will dwindle, their drought will continue, and there might be another Kardashian spinoff, basically 3 signs of the apocalypse. Number 6, Oklahoma. Oklahoma really doesn't get good ratings in a couple different things that are important. Healthcare, they're like ranked 48th in the nation. Their education, they're 42nd. And then if you look at their crime, they're ranked 44th in the nation, which isn't great. On top of that, they're in the top 10 for states with residents on public assistance. That being said, Oklahoma City is getting better than what it was in the past. It's turning into a true international city. I mean, they are adding a lot of tech companies there, a lot of tech workers are moving to Oklahoma City, and Tulsa on top of that. I just did a video not too long ago from MakeMyMove.com and Stillwater, Oklahoma, which is a good-sized town, about 45,000 residents. They're one of those cities that's trying to entice remote workers to come live and buy a home in Stillwater. Stillwater's not a bad place. Now, where Oklahoma isn't doing good is a lot of their small towns. Small towns are dying in Oklahoma on a pretty good scale. I've been doing that series about small towns in the United States, and Oklahoma has a lot of small towns that are struggling and still losing population. So I think Oklahoma City is going to continue to do good in the future, Stillwater also, and Tulsa is, like I said, doing okay. The rest of the state, not so much. They're going to suffer for quite a while. Number 5, Arkansas. If you watch this channel long enough, I've said over and over that the northwest corner of Arkansas is not like the rest of the state. They have good jobs, they don't have crazy bad crime, their education's okay. When they see a relative on Tinder, they swipe left. The rest of the state, not so much. They got crazy crime in places like Little Rock and Pine Bluff. Pine Bluff is one of the worst cities in the country. It has been for a few years. Now the question is, will Arkansas improve? They really haven't in the last 25 years, so I'm not sure why they'd start now. They always seem to be a few steps behind whatever progress other states are making. Number 4, Alaska. Alaska is known as the last frontier, and for many decades, people have been drawn to this state for its natural beauty, different type of lifestyle, open land, the great outdoors, and fishing and oil jobs. But living in Alaska comes with a price, and that price is in the form of cost of living. Throughout the years, people have sort of put up with the high cost of living because there was other benefits to living in Alaska. And a lot of the jobs they had there paid really well, so it was worth it. They also have the Permanent Fund, which is a check everyone that's a permanent resident in Alaska gets every single year. It has to do with oil profits and things like that. It can be as low as $1,000 a year, and their best year was 2008 when everyone got a check for $3,269. Well, in the last few years, a lot of these industries have started to slow down, whether it's just they don't have the work or they have more automation, so they're needing fewer and fewer people, meaning fewer and fewer jobs. And if you don't have jobs, people don't stick around. Now, there's there's a lot of good in Alaska, obviously the outdoors being the main bonus to living here. Sadly, more and more these days, fewer people are finding that as enough to keep them in the state of Alaska. Alaska has gained double digits in their population every single census since the 1930 census. In 2020, they only gained 3%, and it's estimated by the 2030 census, they will have lost up to 13% of their population. Number 3, New Mexico. New Mexico has a whole bunch of problems, and some of them are pretty bad. Their crime rate's pretty high, their schools aren't good, their poverty rate is through the roof. They're actually number 3 in the nation for the highest poverty rate at 18.2%. Now, that's of 2021 numbers. My understanding is they've climbed since then. I've seen reports where it's now 19%, and I've seen other ones where it's like 18.8, so it's somewhere in there. Of course, they have budget problems on just about everything, so that means different services are being cut. If you look at where they rank for their different things, crime, they rank 47th, their economy, they're 45th, their education, they're 50th. There aren't really a lot of good stats going on in New Mexico. The people are nice. It's got great sunsets. That's about it. Is it going to get better? I don't see that happening for at least another 5 years to maybe a decade or two. I mean, they almost always get better in some aspects, but overall, all these states are just going to be going downhill for at least the next few years. Number 2, Mississippi. Yes, our old favorite Mississippi is towards the bottom of the barrel again. They did have severe flooding in their capital city of Jackson, like last week and the week before. I think they're still trying to recover from that. Mississippi leads the country in poverty. The 2021 numbers were 19.6% of their population living below the poverty line. Again, my understanding is it's gone up a little bit, maybe 0.5%. Other than some really decent people, I would love to hear in the comment section what is good about Mississippi. Well, I should walk that back a little bit. To be honest, they do have some really good universities. They're ranked 50 in the nation in healthcare. Their economy is 49th. Infrastructure, they're number 48th in the nation. Out of the 12 different categories that they normally rank a state by, 8 of those categories are in the 40s, meaning top 10 worst. And then 2 of them are in the 30s. Natural environment is ranked 22, and that's the best thing that state's got going for it. And number 1, Louisiana. Louisiana has been backwards in a lot of different ways for a lot of years. Most of their problems can be traced back to their politicians. Louisiana is often considered one of the most corrupt political states we have, and this goes back decades to, I'm talking before Prohibition type stuff. It's always Louisiana and Illinois, which one had the most politicians go to jail? In the history of the United States, 12 governors have gone to jail. There's 2 states on that list where it's happened more than once. That's Illinois with 3 and Louisiana with 2. If you look down at like the state senators and things like that and state representatives, Illinois and Louisiana show up quite often there too. So when you get bad politicians, they make bad decisions. They're not making decisions for the people. They're usually making decisions to line their own pockets. And this usually means a state gets kind of run down a little bit. When it's gone on for decades and decades, you end up with a very historic and beautiful state like Louisiana that kind of sucks. Will Louisiana pull out of this tailspin? No time soon. It'll continue to get bad. They have crime and poverty issues that will take a generation to fix. And if they keep having politicians that go to jail, it's gonna take longer than that.
All right, let's see what changed from 23 to 24 with the next one we did in 2024, which is states going downhill. Let's take a look.
Today I will tell you which states you probably want to avoid in 2024 and why. Welcome back to the series. This is our 3rd year doing this one, and I have to say we've been pretty accurate the last 2 years. At least that's my opinion. I could be wrong, according to you. As we go through this list, I'm sure some will feel that we skip some states, and that is probably because we think that they've already hit rock bottom and the future looks better from where they sit today. West Virginia is a perfect example. They have wonderful people and amazing landscapes. And after that, it's kind of hard to find some solid positives about the mountain state. It is dirt cheap, so maybe that's worth the risk. Sort of like gas station nachos. Some people think 99-cent nachos are worth risking a trip to the ER. You eat those, 2 hours later, you feel like you're having a heart attack, they rush you to the hospital, you're in there, you're sure you're dying, you tell your wife you love her and you apologize for all the wrongs that you've done. She's upset, she's crying and sort of pissed about a bachelor party apology, and then the doctor comes in and says it's just gas from some low-budget nachos. We've all been there, right? Every state, every city, every town, and every country has its ups and its downs. In this list, we will look at 10 states that are having their downs and why. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, New Jersey. New Jersey has always had its problems, from its Superfund sites to its really bad urban areas. Now, if you don't know what a Superfund site is, I've talked about it before on this channel, but back in the day, the entire country did, but New Jersey was the worst. They had a bunch of companies that were just dumping, chemicals or doing just weird stuff, and New Jersey sort of turned a blind eye to it for a long time. Well, when different environmental laws passed, they had to clean them up, and they became known as Superfund sites. New Jersey's not the biggest state, but they had by far the most. Now, they've made some progress on the Superfund sites and some other things, but they've got a few things that have gotten worse and will continue to get worse in 2024, like their taxes and a high cost of living. High property taxes and high taxes in general make the state very unattractive for residents and businesses. This is nothing new, but as prices rise, so will the rate of people leaving the Garden State. The two main things that make people leave or move is jobs and cost of living. And one kind of feeds the other. As the cost of living goes up, companies move, then the state loses jobs, and more people move out. They also have a pretty bad problem with infrastructure. Their infrastructure strain is pretty rough about now. The state is facing challenges in maintaining and updating its heavily used transportation infrastructure. There's a lot of use on the New Jersey roads, not just the residents putting the wear and tear on the roads, but New Jersey's right there with New York, and there's a lot of trucking, a lot of transportation of people driving the roads going back and forth through New Jersey. The vast majority of the people driving into New York City every single day are coming through New Jersey. Number 9, Nevada. Nevada's gonna see some rough times here in the future. I mean, they're sort of feeling it right now. I watch a couple different channels where they focus on Nevada, and they're talking about how the tourism numbers really aren't what they thought it would be after COVID. If you don't know, it should be obvious to everyone that Nevada's economy is reliant on tourism. Tourism has its ups and downs, normally with the season, but when COVID hit, it really hit Nevada hard, both Reno and the Las Vegas metro area, where most of the people and 90% of the businesses are. I think they've faced some other things now that a lot of states have legalized gambling, and of course the Indian casinos sprinkled throughout the United States. Those have been going on for a long time, but every year they get bigger, every year they get better, and just chipping away at the draw to Las Vegas and Reno. They also face some serious problems with water scarcity. As part of the arid Southwest, Nevada faces significant water scarcity issues every single year, and every single year it gets worse. The winter of 2022 to 2023 was a really wet winter for the West, and that helped out. But we might not see that again, and they'll be right back to really hurting for water. Every city wants to grow. Every city wants to bring more people in. That's how they get a bigger tax base. But when you don't have enough water to go around, got to come up with a better plan than what they got going on right now. Number 8, Kentucky. Kentucky's one of those states that we never talk about. I was just mentioning this recently. We never talk about it here because they're never quite the worst, and they're never really that good. But Kentucky right now is facing some serious problems. Their health challenges. Kentucky faces public health issues, including a high rate of smoking deaths and smoking illnesses, along with obesity. This is one of the most unhealthy states we have. Now, you might say, how does that affect the state going down if these people aren't healthy? Well, first of all, not everyone has private insurance. The state has to pay for that. And when you have more people on disability because of health issues, the state's got to pay for that. Sure, they get some money from the federal government, but a good portion comes out of their own budget. They also struggle from years of not really having that much of a diverse economy. They were really reliant on coal and agriculture for many, many decades. And as coal goes downhill, like some of the other states, so does their income for the people, and the tax base shrinks as well. Which means besides the people on disability, now you got more and more people on unemployment. They're like 2 or 3 bad moves from becoming the new Mississippi. Number 7, Arkansas. Arkansas's got a whole truckload of problems. And I've mentioned this again before. I've mentioned a lot of things before, but everyone's complaining about their governor. I don't know what the deal is. I don't really follow politics like I probably should. I've kind of sworn off it a bit. But I get comments all the time, and I get emails all the time about how I should make a video about how bad the governor is in Arkansas. Just quit suggesting it. I'm never going to make a video like that. That's not what we do here. Here's the problems with Arkansas. They got poverty and income inequality. Arkansas has some of the highest poverty rates in the United States, with associated issues such as food insecurity and lack of access to health care. This has been going on for a very long time, and it's just going to get worse. They also really dropped the ball when it comes to educational attainment. The state has historically had lower levels of educational attainment compared to the national average, which can affect workforce development and economic opportunities. Rural challenges are another problem Arkansas has. As a largely rural state, Arkansas faces the typical challenges of rural areas, including job scarcity, brain drain, and limited access to services. Arkansas also has two of the most dangerous cities in the United States, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and Little Rock. And those aren't going to get any better. Number 6, Illinois. They got Chicago. So yeah, I could just leave it there, but I'll go on. They've got debt and pension issues. Illinois has faced significant fiscal challenges with large public pension liabilities and budget deficits. They've also got a population decline going on, which is going to lower their tax base. And that's just the natural population decline. I'm not even talking about the people that die of lead poisoning in Chicago every year. Number 5, New Mexico. In my opinion, New Mexico is the most beautiful of all the desert states. Sadly, that's where the good stuff ends about New Mexico. New Mexico has problems like educational outcomes, drug problems, crime, poverty, just like every other state, but they seem to be really focusing on it and really trying to make it worse, it seems like sometimes. The state often ranks low in education, which can impact future economic prospects for the entire state, not just individuals. If you don't have an educated workforce, tech companies aren't going to move in there. Companies that need people that have at least a high school diploma won't move to your town, your city, or your state if you got 8 people graduating from a class of 100 every year. New Mexico has been struggling with a high crime rate for many years, and that's not going to change in 2024. There is one bright spot. A friend of mine just retired to New Mexico, and his wife is like the ultimate Karen. She calls the police for any minor public infraction. Leave your car parked on the street for 3 days, she'll call the cops. Your Harley too loud, she'll call the cops. She actually filmed a neighbor who used to sit on his porch and read, but he'd often spit off the porch, like into the street or the sidewalk. She filmed that and took it to the police. They laughed at her. And yes, we make fun of her all the time for this, so this is no surprise to her that I'm bringing it up. I'm just not using her name, Julie. Yeah, New Mexico's problems aren't going to get better anytime soon. Number 4, Alaska. Alaska's got a whole bunch of problems, and being overpopulated ain't one of them. This is the biggest state, and it has one of the smallest populations in the country. The top 5 states with the lowest population are Wyoming with 576,000, Vermont with 643,000, Alaska with 733,000, North Dakota with 779,000, and South Dakota has 886,000. And if you took the land mass of all the other ones, they could all fit into Alaska. You could probably wedge in New Hampshire and Rhode Island along with those. Besides not having a bunch of people, Alaska has other problems. The oil revenue fluctuations. The state's economy is heavily dependent on oil, and fluctuations in oil prices can create budgetary issues, and they face them all the time. Climate change effects also are big in Alaska. Melting permafrost and changing ecosystems are creating challenges for infrastructure and traditional ways of life in Alaska. Now, if anyone wants to leave some comment about climate change is a hoax, it's not a hoax. The only thing that is up for debate now is, are humans making the situation worse? Every scientist realizes that the climate is changing. It's natural. The Earth goes through cycles. The worry is, are humans really affecting how bad it's going to be this time? That's what's up for debate. So before you leave your comment, please update your propaganda. But with the oil reserves and the climate change going on in Alaska, things are just going to get worse in 2024. Number 3, West Virginia. West Virginia has definitely seen better days. I mean, they've been hit with a 1-2 punch, like I've said many times before, with the decline in the coal industry and, of course, the opioid crisis. They've gotten better. They've gotten a lot better. They've got a long way to go. I think 2024, maybe 2025 is the last year you will see them on the decline. I think prices have got so low, people that have jobs or retired people will start moving to West Virginia because the cost of living is low and real estate prices are ridiculously low. And it's just going to get a little bit lower over the next 2 or 3 years. As it gets lower and lower, more and more people will actually move in there. It's not going to happen in 2024. It's probably not going to happen in 2025. 26, 27, I think you'll start seeing West Virginia on the rebound. At least I hope so. There is nothing but good people in West Virginia that have seen some really hard times. And they really need things to break their way for a change. I mean, these people deserve it. Number 2, Louisiana. Louisiana's been going downhill for quite some time. I was just there last January. I'll actually be there again this January. The entire state has some serious problems with their poverty, their economic challenges, crime in their cities and their small towns. I mean, they honestly have some of the worst cities in the country when it comes to crime. Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Alexandria, Shreveport, they really don't have any decent cities. It's too bad, too. Besides all those problems, Mother Nature shows up in the form of a hurricane every now and then to slap Louisiana around just to let them know who's in charge. They should see some problems too with climate change because, I mean, the entire state, or not the entire state, but most of the state is at sea level. And number 1, California. Of course it's California. California has both natural disasters going on and human-made disasters going on. And a lot of it has to do with their politics. I mean, for the human-made disasters, I don't think they've set a policy yet in California requiring a permit and $200 to cause an earthquake. Give them time. If you watch the news or you're on the internet, you know California struggles with a lot of different things. Homelessness, earthquakes, crime, traffic, poverty, Kardashians, a drought, and of course wildfires. California continues to struggle with severe drought and wildfires every single year. Now, it's not like other disasters where you're hoping, like if you're in Louisiana, you hope you don't get hit by a hurricane this year, or you hope a tornado doesn't hit your town when you live in Indiana. You hope you don't get a blizzard this year. In California, they know they're going to have hundreds of wildfires every single year. I don't know about hundreds, but close to 100 every single year. Their only question is, which part of the state's going to get trashed the most? I still struggle with the thought of how come they don't have more of those super scooper planes? California has fires every single year, and a few years back, they didn't even own one. They'd rent them from people to fight the fires every year. California needs a fleet of about 60 of those things every single year. If you don't know what I'm talking about, they're these planes that fly out to the ocean or on a lake, and as they get close to the water, they kind of land and just fill up these tanks underneath with up to 1,600 gallons of water in just a few seconds. They fly off the surface of the lake or the ocean and go to wherever they're needed. Now, I just read that 30 are deployed to California for the upcoming fire season. They got here in September. From what I've seen every single year, that's not nearly enough. I think doubling that number to 60 would be a good start. I think triple would be a good number, 90 of them. That's just the point of view of a man that knows nothing about fighting fires. Besides the wildfires, California has a host of problems like I already mentioned. Some of them they're working on, while other problems are getting worse. And I think those problems that are getting worse are going to drag California down for a few more years.
All right, let's switch things up and take a look at what countries were going downhill in 2023.
What countries do you think are on their way to a total collapse or at least go downhill in 2023? In this video, I'm going to tell you which ones I think are going downhill and why. This is the third video in our downhill series. We've already done states and cities in the US, so before we start looking at who's going to be doing better, we have to finish up with who's going downhill. Every country, large or small, city, town, everyone took a hit the last few years because of the pandemic. Some, in my opinion, have set themselves up for success post-COVID. Others, not so much. Today we're looking at those countries that fall into the not so much category. This video is my opinion. It is based on information that I've taken in over the last year or two. And it's based on things that I've seen, and it's not based on any one stat or one figure. There's a lot of things that go into this. Are these countries 100% bad? No, not really. Will they struggle in the next year and probably beyond? I think so. If you think a country shouldn't be on this list or you think one should have been on this list, I would love to hear about it in the comment section below. These are just my opinions and why. Yours, I'm sure, are just as valid. Get it? Got it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, El Salvador. El Salvador is a Central American country with about 6.8 million residents. It has Honduras to the east, the Pacific Ocean to the west, and Guatemala to the north. El Salvador is a beautiful country with incredible landscapes and great people. They just have made some bad decisions and had some bad things happen there. There's a lot of history from the colonial period and before. The colonial period was not great for the indigenous people. They also had a civil war from 1979 to 1992 where they estimate about 75,000 people were killed. That's just an estimate. There are thousands and thousands that are unaccounted for. El Salvador's economy has been hampered multiple times by natural disasters like earthquakes and hurricanes, by government policies, total corruption. You name it, it's worked against the El Salvadorian economy. Just last year, the president, who's a big cryptocurrency enthusiast, he decided to make Bitcoin a legal tender in El Salvador. It's only been a year, but most experts say it's a disaster. A lot of people might think this is great. El Salvador is a cryptocurrency dream. But really, it's like a cautionary tale at this point. Trust has fallen to the point where it really looks like El Salvador in the next few years, especially in the next 6 months, are going to fall on some hard times. Now, like I said, it's only been a year and there still is potential for this to kind of turn around and bring in outside investment. But it's not really showing much sign of that right now. That's why I think they're going downhill in the next year, at least. Now, keep in mind, this isn't the worst countries on the planet. These are the ones that I think will go downhill the most over the next year at least. Some countries are so bad they can't go any lower. Number 9, Belarus. Belarus has attached itself to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They're one of the few countries that is backing Russia on this, and they're paying the price. Western sanctions have been hard on Russia, and because of its stance, Belarus is now feeling the effect. This just isn't US sanctions. This is like everyone's sanctions almost. As this war drags on, and if Belarus stays aligned with Russia, it's just going to get worse for the entire country of Belarus. I mean, it's too bad. This is a beautiful country with great people. It's just they're politically aligned in a way that it's really going against what most of the world's doing right now. Number 8, South Africa. South Africa has a lot of problems. One, crime is kind of out of control. South Africa took an exceptionally large hit when it came to the pandemic. COVID-19 wrecked the economy of this country. Now they are recovering a little bit, but poverty and unemployment are still really bad in South Africa. Combine that with the serious drought they're facing right now, it's like a disaster cocktail. And that's why I think South Africa is going to be going downhill in 2023. Number 7, the United States. Yep, I believe we're going downhill. We have been for quite a few years. The pandemic hit the United States just like everyone else, but we had a little bit of an additive, I guess you could say. The facts and conspiracies put Americans at each other's throats over something that we should have all got together to try and defeat. So not only were we fighting a pandemic, we were fighting each other over it. And that, I think, will have lasting effects on the United States. We've got political turmoil, we have inflation problems, we have gas price problems, healthcare problems, supply chain problems, a worker shortage. But really, the political turmoil is the biggest thorn in the paw of the United States right now. I'm not saying where you stand is either good or bad, but I mean, we've had the Supreme Court make some decisions that have been unpopular with half the country. You got that total shit show that's swirling around every aspect of the 2020 election. You know, anytime I see anything on the news about that whole thing, I just remember that show, The Osbournes. Remember that Ozzy Osbourne, the reality TV show about his family? Well, his son, Jack Osbourne, said something that has always stuck with me. And it's not like I go to Jack Osbourne for wisdom or guidance or anything like that. Actually, he's probably one of the last people this sentence just stuck with me. He said that historically, countries or civilizations don't last that long. And he said he didn't see the United States lasting another 50 years. Sometimes you see things that are going on in Washington, D.C. here in the United States, and you think, yeah, maybe Jack Osbourne's onto something. I hope not. I like my country. Number 6, Pakistan. Pakistan's been in bad shape for some time now. I think it all started when India got nukes some time ago. They decided they need nukes because their neighbor had nukes. Sure, half their people were starving, but they needed nukes. When they first started doing their testing years ago, they had the people in the streets celebrating their new nuclear program. You're looking at these people going, yeah, they were forced to be there. Financially, since the pandemic, Pakistan is doing incredibly bad. Pakistan has already initiated talks with the International Monetary Fund for a bailout package. A Karachi-based newspaper called Dawn, in an editorial, noted that any further delay in the IMF agreement would only cause irreversible damage to the economy of Pakistan, and said their current situation is unsustainable. They're also suffering from fallout from the war in Ukraine. And they just had devastating floods that are sure to create a food crisis. Yeah, I don't see 2023 getting any better for them. Probably 24, 25, 26, if nothing else happens. Number 5, Sri Lanka. You ever heard of Sri Lanka? I have. I used to go to school with some kids from Sri Lanka. Well, now they're like 50, but they were kids when I knew them. So I knew all about the country. couple of them did speeches in a speech class I had, and it really sounds like a beautiful country. And I got to tell you, they were some of the sweetest people I've ever met. One of their moms, and I'm not even going to attempt to do the accent, but it was just great. She's all, "You're Mr. Briggs. I understand you have quite the funny bone." Of course, I snickered. Sri Lanka's economic crisis that was triggered by a debt default, food, and fuel shortages has led to violence in the streets. They've had quite a few riots, and some bad things are happening there. This has hit the headlines, but several other countries are seeing the same thing, like the one we just talked about, Pakistan, South Africa's in that, Nepal, Ethiopia, Ghana, Peru. They're all facing the same thing. Sri Lanka is in the grip of ballooning debt, trade deficits, and falling foreign exchange reserves. The COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine conflict have pushed debt levels sky high in Sri Lanka and other countries. It's actually quite alarming. I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't some kind of coup, the president steps down, or they have an all-out civil war in Sri Lanka soon. Number 4, China. Yes, the economic power of China is not doing great right now. Do I think they're going to collapse? Absolutely not. Do I think they're going to see a couple rough years? I think they are. They've already had to freeze people's funds at different banks to stop the banks from collapsing. The thing is, the economy for China has been incredible over the last few decades, and it's continued to grow. The problem they have now, they're a victim of their own success. Now, I'm not going to get all into it. I will tell you that Graham Stephan, he's a YouTuber, he's gone really in depth on it on a few different videos. I'll link one down below. But I'm in total agreement with him that it's already started to go down and they're already facing financial problems. It's just going to get worse in 2023. Now, he also mentioned how China has been using bots to suppress information from videos like this one. So make sure you like the video, please. Number 3, Ukraine. Unless you've been living off the grid since January of 2022, I'm sure you know that Russia invaded Ukraine about 200 days ago, a little bit over. Russia, of course, thought it was going to be a big walk in the park and they just take the country over. It hasn't turned out that way, and this thing has dragged on, like I said, over 200 days now. There's no end in sight. Ukraine is basically in shambles right now, and the damage that has been done will take decades to repair. Ukraine was in debt before the war to the tune of about $20 billion. That doesn't sound like much to China and the United States. That's big to Ukraine. Now, I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of debt forgiveness and, they're going to put things on hold and aid will come in once this is over. But right now, in the near future, it's not going to get any better. It's affecting other countries in Europe too. Ukraine is among the world's top food producers and exporters and is often described as the breadbasket of Europe. Yeah, do I think Ukraine's gonna go downhill in 2023? Absolutely. Number 2, North Korea. This shouldn't shock anyone. I mean, everybody knows that North Korea is in bad shape. They got serious food shortages. They've got serious economic problems, and they've closed themselves off to the world. Just about everyone except for China. And as we've already learned, China's starting to have some problems. And I think what's going to happen to North Korea is sort of what happened to Cuba. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the checks quit coming in the mail. So you have another one of those countries where the people are starving, but they do have nuclear weapons to keep them warm at night. But I see the economic future of North Korea being in step with whatever goes on in China. The difference is, China sees it as a small blip on their economy and it'll recover in a couple years. North Korea is in a much more dire situation. A lot more people are going to die of starvation in that country.
All right, let's do one more. Cities going downhill. This one's from 2024. Let's take a look.
Are you looking for a new city in 2023? If you are, like I said in the state version of this series, you're not alone. 2023 is predicted to be one of the most active years for relocation on record. In this video, I'm going to tell you which cities you should probably avoid. As we slowly come out of the pandemic, a lot of cities have started to turn things around. Every city, large and small, took a real hit over the last few years because of the pandemic. Some, in my opinion, have set themselves up for success post-COVID. Others, not so much. Some of these cities are dealing with old problems that have gotten worse while picking up some new ones. And those are the cities we're looking at, the ones that will be getting worse in 2023. Now, I'm sure some of you are going to say, what about this city? What about this city? And like San Francisco or Chicago. And I think a lot of cases, some of those have already hit rock bottom and they can really only go up. This isn't the worst city list. This is cities I think will be getting worse. Keep that in mind. But this video is my opinion based on information that I've been taking in over the last year. Are these cities 100% horrible? No. Will they struggle in the next year and probably beyond? I think so. If you think I listed a city that shouldn't be on this list, I'd love to hear about it in the comments section below. These are just my opinion and why. Unless you're just a troll, I'm sure you have some valid opinions. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Houston, Texas. Of all the major cities in Texas, Houston's the one that's like nobody wants to move to. Now, people are moving there, so don't quote me on it, but it's just not as popular as the other ones. And for good reason. Houston kind of blows. Over the last 6 years, Houston's crime rate has continued to grow. Their schools don't get the best marks, and their poverty level in Houston is 45% higher than the national average. I'd give you their exact unemployment rate, but it changes so often, it's just safe to say that it's between 8 and 10% higher than the national average most months. There's a lot of cool things to do and see in Houston, don't get me wrong. It's just these days the crime rate and some of their other stats are just keeping people away and driving people out. And it's too bad. Texas has a lot of places that are doing good and getting better. Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, San Antonio area, Austin's one of the most popular places to move to right now. El Paso's pretty good. I'd move to Amarillo before I'd move to Houston. And not because I'm a dirt field enthusiast either. They ranked 150 of the largest cities in the United States on different categories, and one stuck out to me about Houston was their quality of city services. Out of 150 cities, they're ranked 126th. Number 9, Philadelphia. There's a lot of pros when it comes to Philadelphia. It's just got a lot more cons these days. Speaking of cons, their crime rate's growing too. I mean, it's a major city and you can't expect it to have perfect crime or below average crime. That's just how big cities are. But their violent crime rate has been growing in the last few years. It's actually right now 134% higher than the national average. Is that the worst in the United States? No. Is it pretty scary? Yes. If you want to see something that is alarming, YouTube or Google Kensington, and it's a neighborhood in Philadelphia that is just filled with homeless and drug addicts. It is so bad, there are third world slums that look better than Kensington. Remember that service stat I just talked about for Houston? They're actually worse than Houston. They're ranked 129th in the nation. Now, there are some wonderful areas of Philadelphia. Don't get me wrong. I mean, every city has these. I mean, except for the one that's right across the river from Philadelphia, Camden, New Jersey. Yeah, that place is bad all the way around. And I think that helps bring down some of Philadelphia's stats. Number 8, Jacksonville, Florida. Jacksonville's one of those places you never really hear about unless you're an NFL fan, or if you live in Florida. I haven't visited Jacksonville probably in about 5 or 6 years, but I've been there like 3 or 4 times, and I've been very underwhelmed each time. The only thing I really did like about Jacksonville was the downtown area by the St. Johns River. The whole waterfront area, that's pretty nice. But you get into some of the neighborhoods, it's not worth your time. Jacksonville's crime rate has been climbing at a pretty good pace. In some of the suburbs and neighborhoods, it's been climbing pretty bad. Now, what really gets them on this list besides the crime is their employment. Their employment numbers haven't looked good, and they don't have a lot of really good paying jobs on average. Their income per capita is about 20% lower than the national average. And their poverty rate is almost 15% higher than the national average. From what I've seen, they just haven't rebounded as well as other places in Florida after the pandemic. Granted, the pandemic's not entirely gone, but we're on the downside of it. At least we hope, right? Yeah, so in 2023, if you're going to be moving to Florida, there's better places to choose than Jacksonville. Number 7, Riverside, California. Riverside is like in the armpit of California, but to be fair, California has several armpits. This is one of about 12. Riverside is southeast of downtown Los Angeles, and it's kind of where Los Angeles sends all its smog. It's hot, it's miserable, it has a lot of potential, it's just not living up to it. The prices, though, when it comes to housing and cost of living, they act like they're living up to their potential, and they're really not. The cost of living in Riverside is about 25% higher than the national average, and housing is about 50% higher than the national average. Now, for California, that doesn't really sound like it's a bad thing, but Riverside's out in the middle of the frickin' desert. Almost. Their schools get rated a big F, as does their crime. Their crime is not good. Their violent crime's about 20% higher than the national average, and their property crime's about 55% higher. That kind of goes with people not having really good jobs and a high cost of living. They start stealing your junk. Now, I grew up in Southern California near the beach, and I'm a little bit of a snob when it comes to this part of California. It kind of sucks. And I see it just going downhill all of 2023 and maybe 2024. Number 6, South Bend, Indiana. You ever hear of South Bend? If you're a college football fan or you live in northern Indiana, I'm sure you have. It's where Notre Dame is. It also has the St. Joseph River flowing right through town. It is sandwiched between Gary, Indiana, Toledo, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, and Chicago. It's like kind of in the middle there, a little closer to Gary and Chicago. So it only makes sense this place is gonna blow. It wasn't always that way. This was a major industrial manufacturing area back in the early 20th century, even to the mid 20th century. Because of the St. Joseph River, Studebaker, the old car manufacturer, they set up shop there. It still has some remaining large corporations that are based in the area, including Crow, Honeywell, and AM General. You know what else they got? A lot of violent crime, and for some reason these people like to use knives. They have a strange amount of knife attacks in this city. The violent crime rate in South Bend, Indiana is actually 346% above the national average. So it is one of the most unsafe metro areas in the United States, and nobody ever really hears about it. Their crime rate continues to grow, poverty continues to get worse, and according to Area Vibes, their schools get a giant F. The good thing is, they got a lot of things to do and their cost of living is pretty low. Housing, not so much. I mean, you can find a lot of cheap houses here. It's just, do you really want these houses? Look at this purple gem they got for sale in South Bend right now. It's going for $125,000. It looks like Barbie's substance abuse house. Now, is that purple or is that more of a mauve? Anyway, as long as you're selling houses like this and you have a crime rate that high, this place is going to continue to go downhill. Number 5, Hartford, Connecticut. If you don't know much about the East Coast and New England in general, you're probably just by reputation going to think that Hartford, Connecticut is a nice place. I mean, it's in New England. New England is one of the safest regions in the nation. They have 3 of the absolute safest states we have: Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. They're 1, 2, and 3 every single year. Connecticut also has some of the richest neighborhoods and towns in the country. Some of the wealthiest people we have living in the United States are in Connecticut. Not many of them live in Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford, Connecticut is kind of a nightmare. The good news, it's one of the least expensive places to live in New England as far as cities go. The downside is you're taking your life into your own hands. Their violent crime rate is 156% above the national average, and that's up from 120% above the national average in 2019. 2017, it was only 65% above the national average. It's going in the wrong direction. The unemployment is always high. Right now, it sits about 130% above the national average. That fluctuates. Next month, it could be 110. 3 months from now, it could be 90%, but you get the idea. Their poverty rate is also 111% above the national average. This is a major city, at least by New England standards. The town itself only has about 121,000 residents, but the metro area has a little over 1.2 million. I couldn't find any of their major stats that have gotten better over the last 5 years. There's no sign of the suckage to stop anytime soon. Number 4, Memphis, Tennessee. Easily one of the worst cities we have going on right now in the United States. It is catching up with Detroit, and I think at some point it's going to pass East St. Louis as one of the worst cities in the United States. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, their crime rate is 237% above the national average. Their violent crime rate is 506% above the national average. There are Mad Max movies with less violence than this city, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon. It's just going to continue to go downhill for some time till they get a handle on their crime. That's the biggest problem here. Well, that and their income per capita, household income, unemployment rate, their schools. The only thing that gets high marks in Memphis is their cost of living. It's pretty cheap to live here. As we all know, a cost of living is a good indicator on how popular the city is. If it's cheap, nobody wants to live there. If it's expensive, everyone wants to live there. Number 3, Little Rock, Arkansas. In 1994, there was a documentary, which I thought was a mockumentary, that came out called Bangin' in Little Rock, and it showed how gang members were in Little Rock and the crime and the violence and the drugs and all that good stuff. It hasn't got much better. Their crime rate is 186% higher than the national average. Violent crime rate is 377% above the national average. They got serious poverty issues, infrastructure issues, but they do have one really cool thing. Their schools are rated very well, oddly enough. They get graded a B-, and their cost of living's not terrible. But when you got stats like they do, you'd expect the cost of living to be a little bit better than it is. It's 4% lower than the national average, but when you're living in that kind of crime and the housing sucks and the poverty's everywhere, you expect the cost of living to be, there's a trade-off, you want it to be lower. You're just not getting it here. And nothing's gonna change here in 2023, I promise you. Number 2, Jackson, Mississippi. So Jackson normally kind of sucks, but just recently they had some severe flooding. People have gone without power and water. The flooding kind of went down a week ago, and as of yesterday, the water was restored, but it was still undrinkable. There are only 3 types of people living in Jackson, Mississippi. People that were transferred there from their work, they have family there, or they're on parole and they can't leave. Jackson, Mississippi is often brought up as the worst capital city in the United States. In case you didn't know, Jackson is the capital of the Magnolia State. All right, before we get to number 1, don't forget we have another channel called On This Day. There's a link down below. We'd love it if you went over there and subscribed. Also subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, Stockton, California. Not many people hear about Stockton, California, unless maybe you're a UFC fan. 2 of their biggest stars are from Stockton. Ex-stars, I should say. I don't think they're fighting for them anymore. Stockton is east of San Francisco and Oakland, but north of Modesto. This whole part of the Central Valley of California is where hopes and dreams go to die. It is surrounded by farmland, and if those farms weren't there, they'd be surrounded by desert. Stockton gets poor grades for their schools, their unemployment's pretty high, their crime rate's pretty high. Total crime rate's 82% above the national average, and violent crime rate is 229% above the national average. This whole part of California is just kind of another part that's failing. Is it failing as bad as, let's say, San Francisco? I don't think so. But I think San Francisco's hit rock bottom, so they're not going to be getting worse in the coming years. They can only get better. Stockton, on the other hand, has a way to go till they get to the bottom, and I think the bottom's going to come in 23, 24, or 2025. And that's why they're number 1 on this list.
All right, now it's time to take a look at cities that deserve to be bulldozed and started over. Basically, cities that have no hope. They have some hope, but they're in bad shape, and maybe it is a better idea just to mow them down. Let's take a look.
Have you ever been to a city and thought to yourself, there is no saving this place. It needs to be bulldozed and start over. Who hasn't, right? These cities always have high crime, decades of poverty, buildings that are falling apart, and there's this persistent vibe of depression and despair. In my life, I've been to my fair share of these cities. It's normally a place that has sucked for a very long time, and it really doesn't look like anyone has any interest in fixing it. Today we're looking at cities that are at the point where they just need a do-over. Cities where the best option is to mow it down and start over. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Toledo, Ohio. Toledo, Ohio sits about an hour south of Detroit on Lake Erie, right on the Michigan-Ohio border. This is a place that's known for the cross-dressing soldier Max Klinger, a baseball team called the Mud Hens, and not resurfacing their streets too often. It's been a few years since I've been there, but I've been there like 3 times, and each time the roads were just horrible. My main problem with their roads, I guess, is their inability to understand that manhole covers are supposed to be flush with the rest of the street. That's not how they roll in Toledo. They want a manhole cover that sticks 2 or 3 inches off the road, just so you know it's there. Toledo is a Rust Belt city and a Rust Belt state that at one point made a lot of cars. These days they still make some car parts and some cars, like the Jeep, that's still made there, but they also make a lot of crime. Not the Jeep plant, just the people that hang out around the city. They have a total crime rate that's 66% above the national average, and their violent crime rate is 159% above the national average. Their employment numbers are horrible. Their schools don't get good grades according to area vibes. The only good thing is they got a pretty low cost of living. And that's always the case when everything else sucks in a city. It's pretty cheap to stay there. You know the golden rule, if no one wants to be there or if no one wants it, it's pretty cheap. Like Detroit, Toledo has a lot of neighborhoods with a lot of vacant property. They got a lot of abandoned commercial buildings like warehouses and things like that. In my opinion, I think about 25% of this city needs to be mowed down and started over. Number 9, Bakersfield, California. Bakersfield gets on this list for a few different things. One, it's the air quality. It's horrible. This is the type of air quality that you could actually feel yourself getting lung cancer. I grew up in Southern California, a good distance from Bakersfield, but it was known to have a certain level of suckage that I didn't want to be involved in. They have a total crime rate that's 94% above the national average, and their violent crime rate's 33% above the national average. Now here's where they shine. Their property crime, that's about 125% above the national average. I'm sure you're asking yourself, why is that, Briggs? Well, it's the employment numbers. They don't make a lot of money and they don't have a lot of jobs. Area vibes give their schools a big fat F as well. Bakersfield is another city that I think could benefit from bulldozing about 25% of the city. Number 8, Port Arthur, Texas. Port Arthur kind of sucks. Kind of sucks in a lot of different ways. The first thing is they look like a lot of the Rust Belt cities like Cleveland, Detroit, and Toledo in one respect. Now, they're not part of the Rust Belt. That's up by the Great Lakes. This is down in Texas, Gulf of Mexico. But they still got that thing going where most every block in the town is missing a handful of homes. Like they were abandoned and the city just had to take them over or something. The other thing that blows about this place is it's surrounded by refineries. I mean, surrounded by refineries. I grew up about 5 miles away from a refinery, and if the wind shifted, it stank. These people share a fence with the largest refinery in the United States. Then when you look at their stats, oh, this is a wonderful place. Their total crime rate's only 35% above the national average, so that's kind of good. The violent crime rate, on the other hand, is 101% above, and their property crime is about 28% above the national average. You're not safe, your stuff ain't safe. If they bulldozed about 35% of this town, it would be an improvement. Number 7, Albany, Georgia. Albany, Georgia has some fun things going for it. Number 1, about 40% of their population lives below the poverty line. That's not good. When the national average is about 11% and you're rocking almost 40%, yeah, you're not doing great. Albany sits about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes north of Tallahassee, Florida. They've got a brewery and a university. Albany State University is there. And I think if they're not teaching kids how to find jobs out of town and rent a U-Haul, it's criminal. Buckle up for their stats. Their overall crime is 161% above the national average. Their violent crime rate is 345% above the national average. And their property crime is 125% above the national average. About 35% of this town probably needs to be bulldozed. Number 6, Florida City, Florida. Florida City is the southernmost municipality on mainland Florida. I say mainland because you got Key West and all that a little bit below that, but past them, you got Cuba and a little bit of water. Florida City is in Miami-Dade County, Florida, and it's pretty much part of the Miami metro area. Florida City is known as one of the most dangerous cities in the entire state of Florida, and it has the highest rate of violent crime. Also, property crime's no slouch. You know, this is another one of those places you're not safe, your car's not safe, your house ain't safe, or your mobile home, whichever you're living in. Their total crime is 261% above the national average. Their violent crime rate is 650% above the national average. Go Florida City. The property crime's 184% above the national average. About 33% of their population lives below the poverty line. Number 5, Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis has been coming up a lot on this channel lately. We've done some Tennessee videos and then some violent crime videos. And when you got violent crime, yeah, Memphis shows up like every day. They're like the norm from Cheers when it comes to dangerous city lists. Memphis isn't all bad. That's why it's not lower on the list. I mean, they got Beale Street, they've got some good history. They're just extremely dangerous, and they got a good amount of poverty in half of the city. But the total crime rate there is 237% above the national average. Their violent crime rate is 506% above the national average, and your stuff ain't safe here either. It's 184% above the national average. You will get your rent-a-car broken into if you visit Memphis and leave your car unattended. The odds are better than blackjack. I think it might be okay if about 35% of this city was given back to the Mississippi River. Number 4, Columbus, Georgia. You know, I rarely talk about Columbus, Georgia. I think I may have some PTSD from this place. Columbus, Georgia is on the Alabama border right outside the gate of Fort Benning, Georgia, where anyone that went into the infantry or went to ranger school or something like that, you've done time at Fort Benning. And then at some point ended up in Columbus, Georgia. I always thought it was strange that there's a Columbus, Georgia on the border with Alabama on the east side of the state. And then on the west side of Alabama, you have a Columbus, Mississippi right on the border. But my experience with Columbus, Georgia is it sucks. I mean, their stats aren't as bad as some of the other cities on this list, like their violent crime rate is 53% above the national average, property crime is only 52% above the national average, and their overall crime is 59% above the national average. They got a whole lot of poverty, and their cost of living is only 1% below the national average. When you got stats like that and you're in Georgia outside a military post, you should have a really good cost of living. They do not. It's weird. And it doesn't help things that they're right outside of a major military base. That's never good for the locals. I mean, that's how they make their money for the most part, but it still sucks. You got a lot of people coming in and out of there that have no connection with the area, and that just never is a good thing. I think a step in the right direction for Columbus is if the government bought like 40% of the town and turned it into a firing range or something like that. Number 3, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Now, if you don't know, Baton Rouge, Louisiana is one of the most violent cities in the United States. Not a lot of people know this. All the focus is on New Orleans whenever you're talking about Louisiana. But Baton Rouge is on the Mississippi River, and it is the capital of Louisiana. It has a population of almost 230,000 residents, with the whole metro area having about 870,000. And most of those people have a 1 in 20 chance of being the victim of a crime every single year. All their crime stats are pretty much in the same area. Their overall crime rate is 146% above the national average, violent crime rate 145 above the national average, and property crime is 146 above the national average. Bravo, Baton Rouge! This is a great place to go if you're not sure if you want to be shot or stabbed. The locals will figure it out for you. This is another city that has the pleasure of having a refinery within its city limits. I think they'd be doing good if they could, find a way to get rid of about 45% of this place. Start from scratch. Number 2, Little Rock, Arkansas. This one should be no surprise. Everybody knows Little Rock, Arkansas is a nightmare. I mean, back in the 90s, we all learned it was a nightmare when they had that HBO documentary, Banging in Little Rock. The thing is, it hasn't gotten much better. A little bit. Around 2000, it started getting a little bit better, but it's still dangerous. And they still got a whole bunch of poverty. That's never changing. The crime rate in Little Rock, Arkansas is 186% above the national average. Violent crime rate's 377% above the national average. And the property crime sits about 148% above the national average. The more poverty you have, the more property crime you're going to have. That's just a fact of life. They got plenty of both to go around in Little Rock. I think if they got rid of half of this city, they'd be moving in the right direction. And number 1, East St. Louis. East St. Louis is a nightmare. A complete nightmare. This place is so bad, if you mistakenly get off the interstate, they have a safety thing where you can get right back on. Here it is, look at that. Ooh, that looks affordable. East St. Louis is kind of strange. It's known as one of the most violent cities in the United States, but it is severely underreported. Here's their stats. Their total crime rate is 41% above the national average. Violent crime rate is 193% above the national average, and property crime is 28% above the national average. There's some theories on why what is known as one of the most violent cities in the United States has such a low crime rate and violent crime rate. People don't report stuff. On top of that, their poverty rate is 43.1% above the national average. I think what's going on there, and I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming it's something like this. Back when I was in the National Guard, I was stationed in Compton, California for a while. This is when Compton was getting a little bit better. It was still bad, and it still is, but it was getting a little bit better than its heyday of the 1990s. And someone broke into one of the buildings on the National Guard complex. So they called the Compton Police Department. And the cop basically said, we're not coming out to do a report unless there's a body. Do you have a body? Said, no, there's no body. Someone just broke into it. And he's all, then it's gone. And I think it's once you get to a certain point of having so many crimes, you just stop reporting all of them. So I think it would be a good move to maybe mow down 75% of this city and start from scratch. Definitely leave the Double Deuce Lounge.
All right, let's finish things off with another one about getting bulldozed. And this is the one we did in 2023, but it was for the year of 2024. Let's take a look.
So our last video was about cities I thought should be bulldozed and started over. Basically, cities that have just sucked for so long, they just need a refresh, restart, whatever you want to call it. Well, as you can imagine, this set the comment section ablaze. Not with the normal comments I get of people defending the cities that I'd mentioned, but people disagreeing with the cities I had picked. People had strong opinions on what cities need a do-over. So today we're looking at the cities that our subscribers felt should have been on that list. We aren't ranking these by any one stat, just by how often people left comments saying the city should have been bulldozed. Now, I also looked at the ones that are hidden because of profanity and things like that. Yes, I have profanity, at least most profanity, blocked from the comment section. So if you ever want a comment to be seen, make sure you don't add any extra profanity or racial slurs or things like that. We'll also be doing neighborhoods in major cities that need to be bulldozed, so leave a comment and tell me which ones you think should be on that list. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, Portland, Oregon. Now this one I really don't agree with. Portland is not that great right now. I mean, serious homeless problem, crime's on the rise. We had riots a few years ago, like every single night for like 90 days. That was a hoot. I did get some good footage of that. So if you ever want to see that, go over to my vlogging channel. I went down there during that and just filmed. It was amazing. Not in a good way. But Portland right now is going through a rough patch, and it has been for about 5 or 6 years. I'm not denying that. I just don't think it ranks up there with some of the worst in the country. That being said, the total crime rate in Portland right now is 124% above the national average. The violent crime rate is only 35% above the national average. Now, if you don't watch these all the time, you might think 35% is pretty high. No, there's some cities in this country that are over 200 and 300% above the national average. So keep that in mind. Where we do have a problem is property crime. There's a lot of people down on their luck in Portland, Oregon, and they steal stuff to get by and just not have a job. I don't know. I'm not going to get into why they do it. We just have a lot of property crime. Nothing like coming out to your car in the morning, your catalytic converter is gone. Did you know crime rate normally goes down in bad weather in almost every single city in the United States except for Seattle and Portland? It actually picks up. I think a good 20% of Portland could be mowed down and we really wouldn't miss it. Number 9, Oakland, California. Oakland, California has had a bad reputation for a lot of years. When you look at their stats, the only thing that is good is the amenities, like the things they have to do there. They got plenty to do. Their housing is expensive. Their cost of living is through the roof. Their employment numbers aren't great. Their schools don't get good numbers. And their crime rate is pretty bad. So I could see this one going on the list. So you see where they stand. Their total crime rate is 175% above the national average, and their violent crime rate is 233% above the national average, with property crime being about 164% above. Oakland does have some pretty scary parts. There's some neighborhoods there that you really have no business being in. If you're a tourist and end up in this neighborhood driving or walking or whatever, you might as well change your title from tourist to victim because you're going to be one. But the stats suck and they still got a high cost of living. Their cost of living is actually 60% above the national average. I think you need to bulldoze about 25% of Oakland and it might be an okay place. Just start from scratch. Number 8, Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey 5 years ago would have been the top of this list as the absolute worst. I mean, their crime was out of control. Their poverty is through the roof. They had no jobs. Serious drug issues throughout the city. Their stats still suck, but they're not as bad as they were 5 years ago. Years ago when I did a list on this, like one of the first ones I did, I was reading an article about a guy who was beat into a coma by 3 women. One of them was hitting him with a Target bag. I guess it was one of those cloth ones, but she had sodas in it. She was hitting him with it because I guess this guy was married to all 3 of them. Good times in Camden, New Jersey. Almost 40% of the population of Camden, New Jersey lives below the poverty line. The rest of New Jersey, it's almost 11%, 10.9. But if you want to look at their crime, it really stands out. Their total crime rate is 60% above the national average, which is respectable. Their property crime is only 10% above the national average, which isn't terrible. Where they shine is the violent crime, 313% above the national average. They don't have a bunch of thieves getting ahead. They got a bunch of dudes out for revenge, I think. I think about 30% of Camden, New Jersey could stand a good bulldozing. You know, start from scratch. And there's still an argument that it's more like 70% could really use a bulldozing. Number 7, Rockford, Illinois. Rockford, Illinois is a little over an hour northwest of downtown Chicago, and in the last few years, it's shown up more often on these negative lists. You're talking about a place that has a quality of life score that's around 51. In my opinion, if you're under 70, you're not doing great. Anything above 80 is a really nice place to live. In the 90s, perfect place to live, almost. But when you're in the 50s and almost dropping into the 40s, you suck. And Rockford, Illinois sucks. Their total crime rate is 92% above the national average. Their property crime, 70% above the national average. Their violent crime rate, again, another place that's excelling in violent crime, 203% above the national average. Good news is, it doesn't cost much to live here. The question is, how long can you live there before becoming the victim of a violent crime? The thing about Rockford, Illinois is it doesn't look that bad downtown. Their downtown area is actually pretty nice, very clean. It's not bad. It's when you start getting into the neighborhood, you're like, oh my God, what's going on here? Why are so many blocks missing homes? Why does that dog have an eye patch and one leg? And why is that man burning tires? Those are normally the thoughts that go through your head when you get out into the neighborhoods of Rockford, Illinois. So much for city services in this place. Look at it, that's like a cable line, or I doubt it's an electrical line, but it's got vines growing on it, so much so it's hanging down. Who's in charge of this neighborhood? I think bulldozing about 26% of Rockford, Illinois would be a step in the right direction. The good news is they have so many vacant lots, it really won't be that hard. Number 6. Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore, Maryland. Now we're getting into the ones that showed up a whole bunch. Baltimore, Maryland showed up a whole bunch. In recent years, Baltimore is starting to develop a good tech industry, which I've said before, but I think in the future, this will help Baltimore maybe turn it around. One of Baltimore's biggest problems is the crime rate. It is ridiculous. I mean, there are no slouches in any of the crime categories. They go all out for all of them. There are some neighborhoods in Baltimore, Maryland that you should not go down unless you have an armored car, and then maybe. Their total crime rate is 163% above the national average. Their violent crime rate is 379% above the national average. Property crime is about 120% above. Oddly, they're not doing as bad in poverty level. It's only 23% above the national average, which compared to the rest of Maryland, which is 9.9%. So they're not doing terrible. Not good, but not terrible. I think Baltimore could stand to lose quite a few entire blocks. Just put them to the ground. Probably about 36% of this city could go away. And I mean, if you relocate everyone, not many people would miss these neighborhoods. Number 5, Flint, Michigan. Flint, Michigan is our first Michigan city of 2 planned Michigan cities on this list. People feel very strongly about Michigan cities and the need for them to be bulldozed or dynamited in some cases. I saw a lot of requests for that. I had one person in the comment section of the last video going on about bulldozing people's homes. Like, I can't believe someone would actually want to bulldoze someone's home, and it's a figure of speech. Nobody's really advocating to go bulldoze neighborhoods. I mean, some of them are in such bad shape, there's almost no fixing them, so that might be the end result, but we're not saying relocate everyone and actually bulldoze their homes. Breathe in, breathe out, relax. Remember, being offended is not a skill. Flint made national headlines some years back when they decided to switch their water system, and they showed videos of the water coming out of the people's taps, and it was like pretty much brown. It looked like raw sewage coming out of people's sinks. And that wasn't their biggest problem. I mean, it's a horrible situation, but their crime has always been their biggest problem. These days, their crime's a little weird, and I'm going to explain some things to you on this one, and it's kind of unique. First of all, you should know that about 44% of Flint, Michigan lives below the poverty line, okay? So keep that in mind. That's like the highest I've ever seen of a percentage of people living below the poverty line. When you look at their crime rate, their total crime rate is only 17% above the national average. That's not bad. Their violent crime rate is 181% above the national average. That's bad. Their property crime is 13% below the national average. The reason for that is everyone's so broke, there's nothing to steal. Now, this one probably could stand to lose about 40%. Now, the reason I keep giving this percentage is I look where most of the crime and most of the poverty is and where most of the rundown buildings are, and I kind of estimate how much of the town that actually is. And Flint could stand to lose about 40% of the town. Get a bulldozer, dynamite, giant eraser, who knows? Number 4, Chicago. Chicago, Illinois isn't as bad as a lot of people think. Sure, they lead the country in murders, okay? Now, we've explained this before. I even had Bry the math guy make an explanation on why this is. They have more people than the next one in line. So when you go by the per capita, Chicago's not that bad. When you got someplace like East St. Louis, Illinois, which has like 600 violent crimes for every 10,000 residents, then you look at Chicago and it's actually like 300 300 violent crimes for every 10,000 residents. There's a big disconnect there. But most people think that Chicago is this horrible place. Now, here's the thing. Part of it is. Southside Chicago is a frickin' nightmare. And if you don't know that already, welcome to the channel because I talk about it all the time. The rest of the city, for the most part, is in pretty good shape for a major city. Major cities rarely look like downtown Mayberry, but a lot of people did bring up Chicago, so here it is on the list. Now I'm going to give you these percentages and you're going to see that Chicago isn't as bad as they tell you on certain news outlets. They're not lying to you, they're just not giving you the whole story. Their total crime rate is 67% above the national average. Not good, but not as bad as they make it sound. Their violent crime rate is only 143% above the national average. Now, if you follow along with different news outlets and stuff like that, you would have sworn that was going to be about 850% above the national average. No, it's only 143% above. Not great, but it's not as bad as people make you think. And their property crime is only 52% above the national average. Southside Chicago takes up about a quarter of Chicago, and I would say they could really do without that. So I would bulldoze Southside Chicago to make the city a better place. Number 3, Jackson, Mississippi. The poverty in Jackson, Mississippi since, I don't know, before the Civil War has always been really high. Right now, the poverty level in Jackson is 30.7%. And that's a little bit better than they've been in recent decades. Mississippi overall is 22.3% above. Now, there's a few different things that go into why Jackson, Mississippi always shows up on people's radar as a horrible place to live. It's the poverty, the infrastructure, employment numbers are horrible, and even the people that do have jobs, they are severely underpaid. Their housing is horrible, their schools area vibe gives an F, and their quality of life is 55. Good news is the cost of living is pretty low, but their total crime rate is 126% above the national average. Violent crime rate isn't terrible. It's only 94% above the national average, and property crime is 132% above the national average. Now, 94% is pretty high, but I'm talking about compared to the other ones on this list, 94 is not terrible. Compare that to Malibu, California, and it's pretty bad. Malibu's 12% below the national average. Jackson, Mississippi would probably be in better shape if they bulldozed about 39% of the town. Sadly, that was almost taken care of for them. They had major flooding this year. It was pretty bad. Number 2, Detroit, Michigan. Now we get into the two cities that showed up the absolute most. I mean, these two blew the rest out of the water. Everybody knows Detroit is in bad shape. It has been since, I don't know, the 60s probably, but it really picked up steam in the suckage department in the 1980s. Detroit's another one of those places that's revamping their downtown, and it looks pretty good, and things are looking bright downtown. It's when you get out into the neighborhoods, you're all, this is a hellscape. Some areas are still livable, but a lot of areas are not fit for human consumption. The total crime in Detroit, Michigan right now is 130% above the national average. Their violent crime rate is 462% above the national average, with their property crime only being 64% above the national average. Again, they have so many people that are dead broke. There's nothing to steal. I mean, all the copper plumbing was torn out of the abandoned homes years ago. Detroit could probably stand to lose, I would say, 50% of their neighborhoods, and their stats would jump up like they sat on an electric fence. And number 1, Gary, Indiana. Gary, Indiana was by far the most suggested city on this list. People got a Jones for talking trash about Gary, Indiana. Sadly, I had an army buddy that was from Gary, Indiana. He just passed away last week from cancer. Gerald Bynum. He was a good guy. But he was from Gary, Indiana, and he got out when he could, like the mid-80s. Gary, Indiana is another one of those places that has a lot of vacant lots, and it's been going downhill for quite some time. I mean, beyond the 80s. I mean, much earlier than the 80s. I would say Gary's heyday was somewhere around 1950. It's like 70 years of suckage right there. Now, we're going by how often it was suggested, and it was suggested far more often than any other city, but their stats aren't as bad, especially when it comes to the crime. Their total crime rate's only 75% above the national average. Violent crime rate's only 43% above the national average. That's not terrible. Property crime's 82% above the national average. Again, not terrible. Their poverty, though, is 39.8% above the national average. That's horrible. The jobs they do have, which they don't have many of, they are very low-paying jobs. Their housing sucks. Area Vibes gives their schools an F. Just not a great place to live. I think Gary, Indiana Indiana could stand to lose about 45% of the city. More manageable, less run-down neighborhoods, they'd be doing good then.
All right, that's today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Thank you for watching our videos. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.